Welcome to this event, or this session. This will be an update on NAN housing strategy. We have Michael McKay from NAN and Sheila McCartney. I do not have the handout bio that was given for the introduction, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves and how they're involved and what they do. So I will be handing out some evaluations. Please take some time to fill out the evaluation near the end of the event. It helps us in planning and for future events. So my name is Clarence. I'm part of the planning committee. It's good to be here with you. Thank you for attending, and let's give our time to Mike and Shelley.
Okay, thank you, Clarence. Thanks for that introduction. My name is Michael McKay. So I work for Anishinaabe Nation. I'm the Infrastructure and Housing Director there. A little bit about myself. I'm a member of Bearskin Lake First Nation. Education-wise, I took the architectural technology here in Thunder Bay. And so I've been in the housing area for a number of years now. I used to work at a couple tribal councils as a housing coordinator, inspector. I used to be part of this planning committee as well. So always enjoy coming here and participating and sharing work. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now. Sheila, if you want to go ahead.
Just to introduce myself, my name is Sheila McCartney. I'm actually a professor at Toronto Metropolitan University, and I have a group that we're called the Together Design Lab. The meaning's in the title. Together means to do things together. My sort of educational background is I'm an architect originally and do urban and regional planning. And I think from there, really what guides all of our work is working with communities to help leverage their visions, work with them to develop tools, and to use engagement tools so that everybody can be involved in that process.
Okay, thank you. The presentation goes up. Yeah, okay. The clicker. Yeah, so today we'll be presenting on the NAN housing strategy and how we were engaging diverse voices in housing change. So we provided some brief bio on that. Yeah, so today we're grateful for the invitation from the committee, grateful to share our project. We're able to share our learnings and how the work came together and shaped by community members, and that was community-led. So the NAN Housing and Infrastructure Department, we have a small team there with diverse skill sets, from architecture, engineering, waste management, fire prevention, and emergency management. So we have a lot of experience. We represent 49 First Nations within the territory. Obviously, lots of challenges with working in those settings, whether it's remote fly-in settings, winter roads within the NAN territory. There's about 6 winter road corridors. It's a large area, and so we have some experience working within that area. Also working with tribal councils and a variety of funding agencies.
I should just stand beside Mike. Together Design Lab really is an interdisciplinary group. And I say research because we're with a university, but we're really focused on participatory action research, which means making things that will help people and people can do things, so it definitely isn't a report that sits on your shelf. We have expertise in urban design, planning, architecture, with many long-term members, which allows us to kind of keep the relationships tighter. People that have been with us for over 10 years. We have sort of full housing systems experience from design and governance and strategy, and also our work really focuses on partnership of working together with communities, because the research work happens because our partners identify challenges, We look at the challenge to see how we can contribute to what could possibly be the fix or the advocacy for that challenge. And then we sort of, through action work, take on that challenge with them and support their building their solutions. So really the purpose of this presentation would be for us to pass some of the work for the last number of years. And so we're going to be looking at 3 different projects. And then rather than focusing on the outcome or the outputs really of that, we're going to talk about how we did that work. How were we able to work with partnerships across 49 different communities with Anishinaabe Nation to build towards the housing strategy, and what are the parts of that, and what are the sort of the gritty parts and decisions that were made to have people feel welcome in those discussions? Why do people keep coming out to participate? Why are people interested in it? And I think that it's because of the engagement and how the work was undertaken, and that's sort of a key piece within that. And I'm realizing you've got the clicker. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. So within that, so the lessons learned along the way can translate into your work. Sorry.
So a little bit about Anishinaabe Nation. We're a political territorial organization representing 49 First Nations. It's a large area spanning from the Manitoba border, Quebec border, and Hudson Bay coast. And it encompasses Treaty 9, but also parts of Treaty 5. There are 4 language groups: Ojibwe, Cree, Anishinaabe, and Algonquin. There are about estimated 45,000 community members living on and off reserve. Of the 49, there are 33 of the NAN communities are remote and fly and access only. And as I mentioned earlier, there's about 6 different winter road corridors within that territory. But yeah, and even I know we have some in my notes here, but and when we're talking about housing and projects and infrastructure projects, these communities depend on the winter road systems, and with climate change, it's really impacting that and some of that planning. So based on the most recent census, 40% of the over 6,000 houses across NAN are in need of major repair, compared to only 5.7% across Ontario. And on average, there are 3.7 people per household compared to 2.6 in Ontario. So we know that the stats and the experiences are significant. Housing need is in repair, and replacement addition to new housing construction is needed, and subdivision expansion is needed, and overcrowding, mold is a common experiences within the communities. The NAN housing strategy. So we began developing the NAN housing strategy about 5 years ago. In 2014, the NAN Chiefs Assembly declared a NAN-wide state of emergency. And over 4 years, and 4 years later, in 2018, facing continued widespread housing insecurity, the NAN Chiefs Assembly reasserted the emergency and mandated the creation of a modern NAN housing strategy. So in thinking about addressing the housing emergency declared by chiefs, we placed a large importance on the idea of a housing strategy based in community, housing strategy being community-based and based around the experiences of community members. Housing is more than a physical structure that provides us shelter. It is where we should feel safe, include our family and loved ones, and the land it's on, and all aspects of community. Housing needs to be viewed holistically, and that's something that was kind of valued or a guiding principle in the work was it's holistic in our approach. So it is a critical part of individual and community well-being. Improving our health and well-being means building better housing and infrastructure. So to understand any problem, we needed to get to the roots of the issues. And so to find out the cause of why housing isn't as safe or appropriate for our communities as it should be. So during the last 7 years, we have heard from community members who are experts in their own housing experiences and about the specific ways that the housing emergency and housing shortage is impacting them and their families. So the development of the NAN housing strategy. So in thinking about addressing the housing emergency declared by the chiefs through a strategy, we placed the importance of the idea of it being community-based. While it has certainly become popular to say that projects are community-based or grassroots, we want to take the time to explore what this would mean for the housing strategy. So through the engagements, we held workshops in 8 First Nations where we did a open call out to all the communities. And so we were able to work with these 8 First Nations. These were done with multiple day trips, working with community groups and understanding existing challenges, successes, and goals for their future that they wanted to see. So in addition to the community visits, the strategy relies on, we had centralized meetings in Thunder Bay with various groups, whether it's housing managers, tribal councils, health workers. We also attended a number of gatherings, whether it was the youth gathering, women's gathering. And so wherever we were able to provide this space, we attended. So many of the workshop activities were created so that anyone, regardless of technical skills, would be able to participate. From there, we would make changes depending on our audience. We worked to create safe space and open discussions by allowing for specialized sessions. We would tailor activities for children and youth, elders, and any other group identified by community partners who may prefer to participate independently. So when we would go to a community, depending on the situation, we were able to adapt the engagement and go meet with them wherever we received those requests. So for example, when working with elders, we did not focus on having worksheets with multiple questions as we might do with housing professionals or larger community meetings. Instead, we used more open-ended questions in sharing circles, allowing elders to share their knowledge and participate at their own pace. So engaging and spending time with community members provided a lot of information about unique and common challenges around housing. It also reaffirmed that housing issues could not be considered in isolation from other challenges such as food security, education, health. All the engagement data that had been collected over 2 years, from workshops to interviews to attending those gatherings and meetings, were reviewed, and we began to try to organize them into different groups or themes. We completed several rounds of analysis, organizing findings by topics such as physical buildings, infrastructure, or well-being, Then we thought about the scale of the issue, who was it experienced by, or who was responsible. So it could be the individual, a First Nation, a tribal council, NAN. So through this, we developed the 7 themes. Goals, and objectives of the strategy. At the core of the strategy development was understanding how the community members shared could be acted on. From this, several projects were developed. Even before the strategy was completed, we began to address issues community members had identified through those engagements. What does it mean to center community voices? Uplifting, trusting, and valuing the lived experiences of people most impacted by the issues we want to address. Centering community voices affirms that lived experience of the individuals most impacted by the issues, and it does not dismiss those experiences for statistics or theories. From this first example of engagement, some of the key things to learn are: all community members are experts in their own experiences of housing and have meaningful contribution to make towards housing change. The importance of using language and asking questions that are relevant to the participant. This may mean you cannot directly ask the question that you are trying to answer, but instead must ask questions, create activities, or build a discussion that allows participants to find a different point of entry. Another thing we learned is this almost always means removing the technical language from engagement. In our next 2 examples, you will see how we try to do that first with a policy-focused project, and second with an architecture-focused project. While these were both quite technical exercises, we tried to remove jargon and other obstacles that might make it hard for participants to share their perspectives. This was one of the most important elements of the NAN housing strategy, was showing people how their experience and priorities could shape housing across the region. The responsibility in community engagement is on the host, not the participant. If you want to make change to participate and become part of the change making, you have to create engagement that is relevant to them and that centers their voices. Here's a slide on just an overview of the projects that we have ongoing within the NAN housing strategy. And so we've broken them up into kind of color coordinated, but those are the 7 themes there and some of the projects within there. So yeah, many of the projects that were developed touch on one or more of the strategy themes illustrated, and shows the complexity of housing issues. We want to briefly walk through some of our projects to highlight some working in partnership and centering community voices that has shaped the work that we do. We also hope that this presentation can demonstrate that community participation and decision-making can be incorporated into basically all housing projects, as well as the lessons we have learned in building diverse engagement methods and approaches.
Thanks so much, Mike. I wanted to point out also Aaron and Zach, who are going to be at the trade show tomorrow, highlighting a couple of the outputs from the products. You can see the housing strategy at that time. You can see some of the outputs from one of the projects that I'm going to talk about that's more architecture-based, so make sure you go see them at the trade show tomorrow, not to put them on the spot. I'm going to have the opportunity to talk about creating a home from our youth, which is sort of right here on this project, which really is thinking about inclusive housing system, and youth were identified as one of the key people within the housing strategy. So to us, across a regional through a PTO, a housing strategy isn't just about a housing needs assessment and the numbers of houses that you need, it's about an entire holistic system. And creating a home from our youth really looked to emphasize how underneath of the NAN housing strategy, it's one of the first projects that we could look at that really looked at doing strategic and strategy engagement in community. So working with the Oshkasiak, or All People's Young Council, CAFOY, which is the sort of synonym for creating a home from our youth, was developed to really understand youth housing journeys through the housing system and different systems such as education, child and family services, health, and justice, and how they impact the access to housing. And that from these sort of youth and community engagements, we heard youth give a really unique experiences of housing and the housing crisis, and understanding those experiences really required a different approach than handing out a questionnaire or only doing a sharing circle, that to thinking about what were the pieces that they were facing, and then to think about together how could those experiences could be recorded in an innovative way that would allow youth to share sort of across a story within them. So together as a team with the Oshkasiak Council and ourselves and with NAN, we decided to conduct a series of one-on-one interviews. But what's interesting in just asking these youth to describe their housing journeys, because we were looking for specific spots where they encountered difficulty or there was particularly stressful, because that begins to point towards, well, that's a place where change can be made. And so by asking people to outline these longer housing journeys, they were telling us a story and we were recording the story, but we were looking for the spots of where and that they had identified they had come across issues. So all of these sort of research activities were approved by Toronto Metropolitan's Research Ethics Boards, but most importantly within that, they were developed collaboratively with the All Youth Council. They were developed collaboratively with NAN and with Together Design Lab, with a focus on how youth could share their lived experience and do it safely. That's a really key component as to how youth can share their story safely and feel safe in that environment. And by taking measures to think contextually about relative mental health resources, only recruiting youth that were not actively experiencing youth housing crisis, and creating a safe environment that was free from judgment, allowed for breaks, and that the team really ensured that no undue harm came to youth in the telling of these stories. Because the telling of the story can be a traumatic experience into itself. So how were youth engaged? We interviewed 27 youth and learned about many of their challenges that young people face accessing safe and secure housing in their communities, in cities, and across Northern Ontario. Interviews focus on the methodology of, it's a complicated one, institutional ethnography, but really it's drawing connections between the lived experience of youth and the institutions that they may be engaging with along their journey, where it be from youth and housing policies, different programs and systems where change is needed. We were looking for the institutions and where the kind of pieces where they were failing youth. One of the workshops was hosted at a youth gathering, and to complement these sort of interview learnings and to learn more about what safe spaces can look like for NAN youth. The result, final report, has 55 recommendations, mirroring some of the ones from the TRC, which are developed specifically for youth and were developed from the interviews and working with the Oshkasiak Council as well as other NAN departments to really kind of get behind this as an entire PTO group across the whole organization. How we began to actually record this, and the youth could actually do this at the same time. So when we applied initially to do this project and received the grant for it, it wasn't during COVID. COVID happened, and at the same point in time, the youth wanted to continue to be involved. And I'm not sure if this means anything to you, but to have 27 youth involved in the process, that's a large number of people that want to get together and contribute because they were seeing and believing that the stories were creating change. Originally, the interviews were to be done in person, but because of COVID, we had to do them virtually, which allowed the youth to select the private space that they wanted to be in to conduct their own interview, which could also be a really beneficial thing to the process. And that each interview really began by explaining what the project was and asking the youth why they wanted to participate. This is a key point for us to find out what was driving the youth to share their time, that they wanted to tell this story. And that the interview was really divided into a couple of parts, a recording, of course, basic information, their age, the community they were coming from, but also a checklist of other types of shelter types they lived in, and then a sort of a larger proportion of where youth could share. And then we began to record it on, this is sort of the basic kind of what we call a Google Jamboard. And of note, Google Jamboard is no longer available, but there is services such as Zoom or Miro to record things in. But really, we did this and moved the pieces around during the shared interview so the youth could see how we were recording the story, but then they could also come back and correct us, say, you got that wrong, let me say that part again, or kind of go along their housing story and describe different parts at the same time. As each interview progressed, a journey map was created as a timeline of each youth's housing journey through text and symbols on the shared board. And it has become a useful tool within the project's sort of broader methodology of institutional ethnography, and emphasizing those key moments of change that were needed, key interactions with housing, adjacent programs and systems and institutions, and the details of those experiences, sort of through concrete kind of visual mode of representation along with the youth's words. We also recorded those personal narratives that aren't shared in a really linear way, but they could move across sort of their housing journey and became sort of more interactive with the board, so someone would see something and then come back to it. And it was a way for the youth themselves in that discussion to have that move things around as the interview progressed. So the basic sort of housing journey timeline was also to record the transcripts from that so we could have the youth's actual words sharing what they wanted to, so that when it came time to reporting, we could use their words rather than our words in describing that. Importantly, the transcript was available back to the youth. They could actually correct pieces out of it, decide if they wanted to continue to participate, and note any changes that we might not have gotten within their stories, or as I said, to withdraw their stories if they decided ultimately that they didn't want it to contribute. The final part of the interview asked youth to reflect on the meaning of home, and also to think about, what they have. It's a kind of a question we've asked since the beginning of the housing strategy, and also to think about and asking youth for ways that they would improve their housing. How would they improve housing design? How would they want to improve the system? And to hopefully finish on a positive note where youth could find and think of a way forward where change is possible. We did not want to end the interviews only telling their story, but to give them a concrete way where we could record those and share them with the chiefs as part of Anishinaabe Nation. But we also wanted to learn from the youth and take their understandings of home, their visions, and amplify them to be able to build the recommendations for the report from them. So the key learnings from CAFWay were really about working together, to understand why people wanted to participate in the project, to support project outcomes. Housing is extremely personal. It's a very personal journey. And at the same point in time, youth are people that are typically forced out of NAN communities and forced into different housing situations. And to support them, because it's such a complex system, what are the key pieces that youth were identifying where we can make concrete recommendations to the institutions and people involved in that. This also means allowing people to have this importance to be able to learn for themselves and to understand that the answers they provide to the questions or the journey they may show may not be what you're expecting at all. It's many times not, but it's something that is completely on its own, and I'd say is authentic to the project and represents sort of the youth within these type of projects. So many times in engagement, people say to me, well, Sheila, I can't do that kind of interactive thing because I don't know if I'm going to get the answer to my question. And I always say, well, then you're asking the wrong question. You need to be thinking about what the answers of the stories that people provide, and that actually forms sort of the basis of the recommendations or the way forward. So these housing journeys really intersect with health, justice, education, child and family services. And by learning from these direct experiences from youth, we can understand how these intersecting systems are causing issues for youth and also make recommendations from them. So thinking of youth within that sort of housing strategy as a group that was identified as needing kind of a clear way forward, and people wanting to know more about that youth experience. In the housing strategy, people also identified, just as our previous speaker did, that many of the houses within NAN communities have been identified as being only for families. and that by providing houses only to families, you're actually missing out on this large group of people. And so through the Cold Shine, which Mike's going to speak to you about, we developed many different housing projects, of which youth was one of them.
Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, so our next project focuses on design challenges related to housing. Yeah, so for decades, First Nations have shared that much of the housing that's built on reserve does not meet their needs and is not appropriate for the climate or geography. So community-led designs for specialized housing in the north, or for short form we call Cold Shine, was created to support communities in getting shovel-ready designs that are unique to their territory, and in particular were designed for those populations most left out of the current housing system, including singles and what Sheila just mentioned, youth. I know we heard that they didn't have a clear pathway to accessing their own home. And so that's one of the populations that we work with. Also, people in housing or in need of housing with supports, whether that's elder housing and also emergency housing. And so those are the populations that we work with. So Cold Shine, it's a multi-year project which looked to encourage flexible and creative design solutions rooted in local lived experiences. Using a community-led approach, a variety of designs were developed that take into consideration the unique needs and geography and cultures of First Nations in the NAN territory. And yeah, for me, it was great to see this project. I know, as I mentioned in my bio opening remarks there, I'm a member of Bearskin Lake First Nation, and there, the territory or the geography is kind of within this kind of a swampy muskeg area, right? So you have to really take into consideration the design of the foundation. And so, you know, I know in the house I grew up in, I think it's almost condemned due to water damage, mold. And so those are things that were brought up within by the community members, and the architects were able to include that within the designs, which Sheila will cover. But so yeah, Cold Shine also addresses themes in the NAN housing strategy, which emerged from what we learned in the community engagements. The co-creation process has centered NAN members' lived experiences to develop designs by First Nations, for First Nations. This project expanded our partnerships, bringing in other architecture firms and other technical professionals that share our values to work with and learn from community members and frontline professionals to design housing that meets a range of those needs.
Thanks, Mike. Cold Shine was a really wonderful project. It's just, we have sort of one large output, and we say was because it was just completed. There's many other steps of the project to complete as well, but in thinking about the completion of the stamped drawings that will be available to NAN communities of the 7 different types of houses. So we've been talking about engagement all the time, so you may be thinking about how do we begin to engage participants and in groups to be able to think about undertaking this project, that there were these different groups that weren't being served in NAN communities that Mike identified. We really began the project to start with identifying these user groups. Who was feeling left out of the system? And there were sort of 4 groups that were feeling left out. And we began to talk to those different groups to think, well, what are the different pieces of how you see the solution to those housing look? And then we realized that, you know, the same type of housing that could support a number of elders could also support people within transitional housing. that maybe that one of the solutions for emergency housing is actually to make better family housing. And so there were sort of two different models of that developed. And what about people that need support for accessibility within their communities? What does that look like? So each group set out its own questions and goals to work through the design process. Each co-creation team, so community members had volunteered to be part of this. I can't remember the exact number, but it was a large group of people. It was sort of 20 per group. Yeah, over 50 community, NAN community members, as well as technical advisors along the way, to really think of what the unique needs of the community members were in the population and how to meet those needs. So to give an example, while an entire group may have chosen to design emergency housing, individuals in that group came from across the territory and may have had different experiences with emergency housing as well. By building and sharing these user profiles, we could establish the variety of solutions available required to address this need and reorganize groups to have people working together through similar ideas. And that throughout the process, participants worked with architects, NAN, and Together Design Lab members to engage in this sort of iterative process of drafting concepts, schematics, and finally full designs and back and forth through a series of both in-person and virtual meetings. So how community members were engaged, there was a focus on designing activities for the project that, given its regional scope and its vision for creating entirely new housing designs, was building sort of from a place of experience, the lived experience of people that had experienced housing over the years in their communities. But really, what does this mean, right? You can ask someone, like, what's your housing experience? But we can also begin to think about what are the elements of housing design that each participant had, sort of giving these various backgrounds, what they had shared already, and the different levels of technical expertise that each of the group people had. It could have been someone that was actively building their community. It could have been someone that was working for a support agency that supported that community. It could be someone that's a technical advisor to that community, or someone that was on the council making decisions about these things. By starting with these user profiles, we're able to really use a person-centric approach, recognizing that a housing emergency is something that's really deep and impacts many different people, and that part of the co-creation teams is that their work was personal and aimed at making the difference for themselves, those they cared for, and their communities. And I just want to point out that in all of these pieces, you don't see people writing out surveys. They're engaging in activities, they're working with pictures to express what they feel is the most important thing to them at that moment. Next, we shifted the focus towards deconstruction of the current housing. So you can see here that people are identifying images of what the house image could look like to here, but down here, the sort of deconstruction, we actually taped out on the ground what sort of a typical NAN house, a 3-bedroom one is, and then using this sort of standard design, we asked all of our participants familiar with it to get very specific about what works in that house and what doesn't work in that house. And we walked around with them into those houses saying what works, what doesn't work, for each population that they were specifically speaking to. So what you see on the bottom right, here's a slide where the house is sort of taped out on the ground, on the floor of this very hotel, in fact, at a 1-to-1 scale that all the teams could walk through. While we were going through these quickly, so while I'm going through these very quickly, other activities were developed for the different phases of the project, and activities were designed to be flexible because of the scale of the project, working from early design to detailed design drawings, as well as developing different design solutions along the way for these different populations. And so as through the team, they were able to build relationships with each other, with ourselves, the architects, and different members of NAN, with other participants, sort of expanding the mentorship network. We were able to think about what really were the different methods to engage people within these different activities, from group discussions to walking through scale models of the 3-bedroom house, and kind of creating different visual aids to allow participants to share their story and to engage in multiple different ways. So while some of these materials may look simple, a few questions on the sheet. There's lots of preparation that goes into these workshops. What are the actual questions that are being asked? And that every guide, there was someone standing around with a sheet like this, recording some of these different answers, leading people through discussions and facilitating and outlining the purpose of the activity, the materials needed, the expected length of time, different prompt questions, so we could sort of engage with the activity, but at the same time the activity would end and yet everybody would get their turn, and we were prepared for the different pieces. So while having a detailed guide can help us and prepare us, it doesn't necessarily guarantee how the workshop's going to unfold. and that some individuals will prefer to have an open questions and others will spend time reflecting and writing, and other people's want to move the pieces around. Even facilitators have their own preferences, markers and poster boards or digital projections and note-taking. But being prepared means also being flexible across a large project and provides an opportunity for participants to find a way of feeling comfortable contributing. This allows us to learn and to better prepare for future workshops, and allowing that people feel heard within this as well. There's multiple solutions to housing in the north, which cannot be captured in the one project. Cold Shine was a very large project, but it also had its limits, which meant that sometimes not finding consensus was okay. It was also okay for participants to have their own preferences for a design solution or their own understanding of an issue. We could still move forward together while remaining flexible and adapting to the participants that are in our group. And when following up with participants after a big in-person event, we didn't always do this as a group because of schedules. Instead, team members had short one-on-one check-ins to make sure that everyone had had the opportunity to share and confirm. And to us, that really is sort of embodied in learning and to design activities and design engagement with care. How you engage diverse voices can really change, and I think that this really came out within the Cold Shine project. Sorry, Mike.
Thank you, Sheila. As Sheila mentioned too, we have a booth tomorrow with Aaron and Zach. He's sitting back there. But they will be sharing some of the products that were developed through Cold Shines. I think we have 7 designs. So they'll be sharing some of that work. We're pretty close, 95% done, getting those drawings stamped and made available free for NAN communities to access. But yeah, so in summary, so all of the projects we undertook together work towards a common goal of improving housing for all NAN communities and fulfilling their right to housing. Each project that we covered today tackles a different part of the housing emergency to understand it and to work, to try and work to address it. A critical part of our projects being successful has been engaging diverse voices from NAN communities in our efforts to create housing change. 3 key principles that we have learned through our work are to center community voices, work from shared objectives, and design with care. We hope that these learnings can support your own efforts in improving housing outcomes by engaging a diversity of voices. But also, I know we mentioned all the community members of NAN that helped come to guide the work. I really want to thank them. I know some of them are in the room today. I know they're very busy and with their own work and taking the time to be involved and guide the work. Definitely grateful for them and miigwech to them. And so that concludes our presentation today. I know we have only a few minutes, but here's our contact information if you want to reach out to us. I don't know if we're doing questions. Yeah? Yep.
With the data and everything, like everything you received and the engagements, is there information where a community can access that to build their own strategy, to build their own proposals, their own project developments? Is there something there that that is available to communities? And that's the first part of my second part of my question is, with all the engagements that you did with various groups and the information you gathered, I guess what information you found was the most useful, and what information was not, like what can we take from this, like from this study, right? To better our chances to get a proposal for our communities to be successful.
Yeah. Thank you, Darren. Your first question about data. So we do have, with our partnership, we do have an agreement, and the data that the participants shared, we become like stewards of that data, which we obviously is confidential, locked up. But at any point, any of those participants that shared that data, they could come to us and ask it to be removed and destroyed, which we will do. I know a few participants in the past have done that, where they would ask that, we do not want to participate anymore, which obviously at their direction we'll gladly do. Maybe you want to talk about the ethics stuff on data?
So I think within that as well, part of some of the projects were actually mentioned from the beginning that elders would want those stories held and be available to people in the future so they could learn from them. So that is definitely something. But I think one of the more concrete things is the immediate needs study that was completed as part of the housing strategy. That really provided information NAN-wide and sort of looked at some of the statistics along with the engagement from that. Other than that, there's different use stories within the different pieces of the reports and recommendations that can be used. But one of the sort of difficulties with sort of the raw data pieces is that they are participant stories, and so unless they gave us permission to sort of share the raw piece. But I think there's many different summaries that have come out of the projects. Out of Cold Shine, there's toolkits that are being built to respond to people's questions, people's identified needs. The drawings themselves are an answer to that, and there'll be sort of different advocacy tools and different things that we as a team will be sharing that will help share what community members really conveyed through all of this work. So we're hoping that sort of the outputs of the strategy itself, for the immediate needs reports, and then the creating a home for our youth, actual documents are served as information that communities can use to advocate and leverage within their areas as well as presentations that explain why the drawings or the houses are designed the way they are. I think those key pieces, all of the teams have recorded those, and I could imagine them being shared as well.
There's a mic, no?
Thank you for the presentation. First of all, I'd like to say I'm fully on board. But just from my own experience, when you develop engagement, it obviously takes time. How do you optimize that, the time aspect versus like the actual impact? Like obviously don't let perfect be the enemy of good here, kind of thing. Like is there some sort of evaluation of how long we should spend on engagement versus applications? Sorry for the question.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great question. It's something that we talk a lot about within our work. And so the theories of involving people at the beginning takes time. But you know what? Not involving them takes an awful lot more time. Right? If you don't involve people and build champions, and I think that one of the key sort of pieces coming out of the Cold Shine project is that there's at least 50 champions within NAN communities that are very committed to that project. They put a lot of time into it. They're also talking to their communities, to their chiefs and councils. And rather than just doing something that falls flat on its face, there is these champions that want this project to be successful. But I would say that kind of goes into anything, right? The work that you put about education and capacity building and preventative house maintenance pays off in not replacing the house later. Designing and building houses that people are prideful of and feel that, like, I contributed to that. This is why that is that way. It's going to enable those houses to have that longer longevity. They also are built with sort of technical expertise that are sort of built at the level of community members. The pieces are sized to be able to fly into communities. So they have that larger piece attached to it. So I think you have to take the long view on that, right? Like, I would argue that it's irresponsible not to talk to people in advance, because otherwise you're going to build things that people don't need. And so one example, and I would say sort of kudos to many of the Cold Shine members and people within TDL and NAN, we have just released one of the key toolkits for NAN members, and it's around construction project management. Construction project management for construction in the north, and what are the key pieces around that? We had 33 people sign up in day one. If we hadn't done the engagement, we wouldn't know of no one what to talk to people about, what the major needs were, and we would have developed some toolkit that no one was going to use. And so I would say by not doing the engagement, you're not going to have the better projects for that longer successful game.
One more question? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so the question is, the tools that you developed and the drawings that are stamped, how is that available to communities? Is it going to be housed on some sort of, in some sort of a library, online library that they can access, or do they just
So just to repeat the question, how will the drawings be available? Whether they're housed online, and how they will be shared with communities. So that was the question. So I guess for one part, so they'll be made available free for NAN communities to access. And one form, well, there's two ways of how we're going to be releasing them. One is kind of a liability form where we'll work with the community and they'll be able to transfer some of that liability to the builder or contractor, right? And they'll work with, the community will work with their builder on that. But as in housing the designs, right now, yeah. So our Aaron, our coordinator who's been managing this project for 2-3 years now, we do have a new NAN housing strategy website. We'll have all that information, but she will be the main contact as of right now as we start to kind of implementing the project.
Is that it for the questions? Oh, another question over here.
It's kind of adding to like Darren's thing of information. Is there like I'm thinking of the youth presentation, is there like a baseline number of youth that need housing right now? And then to add to that, like is there going to be almost like you need a demographer to predict how much more housing is needed in the future? Right? Is that being looked at as well, or is there like a baseline? And then also, is it for NAN communities or NAN members? Right? Because like that's different between up north and there's NAN members in Thunder Bay too, so we'll go, right?
Thank you, David, for that question. As in for like some of the numbers, I know within, so the process we use, as you would know, is we get our direction and approvals from the NAN Chiefs in Assembly. And Sheila had mentioned earlier about a report, our technical NAN immediate needs report, which identified what is needed now within NAN communities, in the communities. 7,588 homes is needed now, and that was approved. That report was approved by the Chiefs in Assembly, and so that's the current need now. That's not even 5-10 year modeling, right? But for the youth housing, that report has over 50 recommendations, but we haven't done any of that forecasting or identifying what the immediate housing need for youth is. We didn't have that yet. It might be something we, if directed by through the housing strategy or from our NAN Chiefs Committee on Housing and Infrastructure, if that's the direction they give us, we'll definitely go towards that. But yeah, that's a good question though. Yeah.
Any other questions? I'm sure that Mike and Sheila will be available outside the session as well. So as a token of appreciation from the committee, we'd like to give them a gift for sharing with us today. So let's...